We'll get started shortly. do, 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 do. How's everyone this morning? Oh. All right, the cans are going on. We are live on Discord. We will get started here shortly. Gotta grab my notes. I woke up early this morning and it just seems like no matter what, I'm just a little step behind. Don't worry, we will shake up. I was getting these weird Facebook messages saying that they don't like the stream. I'm not sure, and now it's zooming in. Sometimes. Oh my goodness, it's the fun part of these live broadcasts. You get to tune into the hot mess. But that's okay. It'll take people a little while to wake up and to join us. Now, if I can just close Discord on this machine, so that way you don't hear the live beep every single time. And I think we're good. Are you guys ready? This is like the pre-show. The pre-show to the awesome show. Another sip of coffee. Oh, see, check this out. Actually, we'll save that for the live broadcast. No, we won't. Watch this. See how you didn't hear me take a sip? That was my mute button. What do you guys think about that? Pretty snazzy, huh? Okay. All right. And thank you for joining me. This is Jacob Burton here from StellaCorner.com and another live broadcast episode. It was a little bit of heavy lifting getting going this morning, running into some live technical difficulties. I had to fire my producer. That guy was just a total just loser. Couldn't figure out how to go to Facebook Live, so I had to do a rage firing. Good old Gordon Ramsay style. Kick him out of the house. Lots of great things to discuss with you today on this episode of the Stella Culinary School podcast. And one of the things that I wanted to get into, but first, I gotta clear this out of my head because, man, and it's not culinary related, but have you guys been following this stuff with GameStop? It is absolutely fascinating, and it's driving me nuts. It's really all I could think about. I don't really even care about cooking right now. This whole GameStop thing is just absolutely incredible. And the funny thing is, so I'm a bit of a tech geek as well as a chef. I'm a big believer in cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin. I think it's going to be it already is a massive emerging technology, but people haven't even figured it out yet. And don't worry, I'll get into the good cooking stuff. But a funny story, quick story, is back in 2014 when the whole cryptocurrency thing was just picking up some steam, I made a really bad investment in a really stupid cryptocurrency. Well, stupid. Well, they're gonna be mad at me, okay? But it's called Dogecoin or Dogecoin. But Dodge is a truck, Doge is a coin. It's also a really kind of lame meme. But I figured, hey, because people are memeing so hard off of this stuff, maybe I'll buy 100,000 Doge coins and see what happens. So I whipped out $100, purchased 100,000 Dogecoin in 2014, and forgot about it. A couple of weeks ago, Dogecoin hit 1 penny valuation, which means that my $1,000 or 100,000 coins, for those of you that are good at math, was worth $1,000. So I start loading up my cold storage wallet. I'm like, I gotta get rid of this shit before people figure out that it's pretty much worthless. It's just a meme. It takes me 3.5 freaking weeks to sync up my Dogecoin wallet. So I'm sitting there syncing it. I know there's better ways to do it, but this is all I care about, right? Or all I care to really kind of to do. Because I'm not in a big hurry, right? It's $1,000. It'll be nice to get rid of the Dogecoin, but it's $1,000, right? So sitting here syncing it. Yesterday, people get kind of all pissy about Robinhood and other brokerage accounts shutting down trading for GameStop as well as other things. And so they start piling into other securities, one of them being Dogecoin, and it shoots up to like 7.8 cents at its all-time high, meaning that my original horrible investment of $100 is now worth $7,800. So I'm trying to send my freaking Dogecoin off to an online account where I could offload it. And of course, like an idiot, I forget my wallet password. So I'm still in search of that. So I'm still sitting on useless Dogecoin because I can't offload it. But the broader picture is, number one, obviously there's a few different sets of rules in this world that people get to play by. And those of us who are relatively working class and work in kitchens, we tend to play by the lower set of rules. And the whole GameStop thing is a bit of a revolt to those two different sets of rules. Someone's saying that it opened up at 400 this morning. That's amazing. It was like $5 a few months ago. Now, with that being said, all of my buddies in the restaurant industry, whether you're front of house or back of house, you need to start looking into cryptocurrencies. They're going to be a big part of our future with just payment processing. What people are doing with the Lightning Network and like Stellar Lumen coins painted over top of pre-existing networks. So Lightning Network is on top of the Bitcoin, and for fast payment processing, you have something called Stellar Lumens, which allows you to transfer money almost anywhere in the world instantaneously at a very low cost. Now, this is all early stages in that technology, but it will emerge, and it will emerge rather rapidly over the next 3 to 5 years. And as people try to decentralize or get away from centralized control over money and networks, and as it becomes more of a priority, you'll see these things grow exponentially. Now, what this means for us in the restaurant industry is, number one, instead of going out and buying overpriced cocktails every other night, you should probably take a little bit of your tip money or the check money and drop it into a any sort of investment, right? So you should have a 401k, you should have an IRA, $100 a week, $100 a month, whatever you can afford. But also Bitcoin, in my opinion, is a good store of value. But I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm a cook that can hardly go live on a YouTube stream. However, you should be looking to the future, because when you show up every single day and trade your time for money, if you don't show up tomorrow to cook that steak mid-rare and just run that steak to that table, you're going to lose out on some money, right? You're not going to get paid the second day, right? The steak is cooked, it's already served, it's gone. People have paid the transaction, and it's done. You want to figure out a way to save some of the money you earn today for tomorrow, because there will come a point where your knees will be shaky and your back will be achy, and you might want to have something to fall back on. Outside of that, the cryptocurrency market is going to upturn how we process transactions. Right now, we do it usually falls around 3% transaction fees for your credit card processor. And just think, in a industry where the profit margins are extremely low, some people are happy with 5% profit, and that's, I mean, I'm not, but it tends to be a successful restaurant. if you have 5% profit. And that's what people consider to be a successful restaurant. You really want to be shooting for 10 at a standalone, uh, 20 plus if you're in a hotel. Now imagine dropping another 3 points on top of that because you no longer pay transaction fees based on the revenue that you're bringing in, right? So that's something that you need to be prepared for in the future, and it's something that you should, if you are an executive chef or a food and beverage director, or even just somebody who is working your way up through the industry right now, it's something that you should be thinking about because it will change how we do business. You guys catch that? I had to sniffle and take a sip of my coffee, and I hit my brand new mute button. For those of you who didn't watch it on the live stream, you might not have caught it. That's what it sounds like when I don't have my mute button. This is what it sounds like when I do. See? New professional touches each and every week. Now, I saw an interesting discussion in the Stella Culinary Facebook group. Somebody was asking about induction stoves, and it led to a broader conversation. Now, real quick, I wish there was a way. There we go. I want to be able to see your comments as you drop them into the Facebook group, but also too, I don't want to see my face because every time I look up at the comments, I see my stupid face there, kind of looking around the screen, and it drives me nuts. It's like talking to a mirror. Okay, so there was a discussion about somebody was looking to. They were moving into a new house. I believe it was possibly Jonah or somebody else. They were moving into a new house, and they said, "Hey, the new house has induction. What do people think about induction?" And it seemed really mixed. Some people loved it, some people hated it. And they had, great experiences, bad experiences. And I felt like people were kind of missing the larger, broader point of how to equip their kitchen. Now, there's this big debate between gas and electric stoves. Gas for the most part, that's an easy win. Electric stoves are kind of hard to work on, but they are workable. And then you have induction, which basically just through magnetism, and it's driven by electricity, obviously can heat a pan. It can heat a pan really efficiently, and you get nice sears with it. And you see in some of my videos, I use induction burners that are just single units you can drop on top of your countertop, which are really nice and effective, especially for if you're hosting a party and you have a lot of people over, maybe you're running out of stove space. I like the induction burners for simmering things like simmering a sauce or reducing a sauce. I can boil a pot of water on it and drop some potatoes in there, drop some pasta in there. You can also take it outside and use this as part of your outdoor cooking setup. Now, I have been into some homes that have really nice induction burners, and so induction burners are kind of like anything else. They are great when they're a high quality, and they are horrible when they are low quality. And I don't have enough experience with the various high quality brands to make a recommendation on a brand, but here is my recommendation for people that are looking to equip their home kitchen with various pieces of equipment, specifically a stove. Now, I have not worked, but so I've done a few catering events, um, specifically for some high end real estate companies. They'll hire me, and this is probably 6-7 years ago when I was living in Lake Tahoe. They would build these beautiful multi-million-dollar homes at the top of a ski mountain, and I would go up there, and they would pay me ridiculous amounts of money to cook in these homes while they were having open houses. And the reason why they would pay me ridiculous amounts of money is because they would say, "Hey, chef, do you want to do this? It would be really cool to have you here cooking food for us in these beautiful multi-million-dollar homes while we show them off." And I would say, "I hate doing that shit. So it's going to cost you, like I don't get out of bed for anything less than $5,000, right? Plus food, plus travel, plus whatever, which is completely ridiculous, right? I just hate doing them. I hate doing these gigs. I don't like cooking in other people's homes, even if it's a high-end luxury home. And I'll be damned, they would say, "Okay," and they'd write me a check. So I got, caught up in doing these, little cooking events in these high-end homes to help them sell them, and people would come through and, they'd taste my food. I would do them on these beautiful, wolf ranges, and they'd always also use, Viking ranges. And there was one where they have this magnificent stove in a center island. So normally you would have your stove in a lot of kitchens up against a singular wall, and this was a large kitchen right in the center island. You had this beautiful stove with these high vaulted ceilings and a faucet off to the side. And while you were cooking on this beautiful stove, it overlooked. You were on top of a ski mountain. I mean, this was like a ski in, ski out property, right? And you overlooked this mountain while you were cooking, which is probably a really nice feature for whatever private chef they hire to feed them, because I guarantee you they're not uh, sitting there cooking on that stove. And so I start to cook this meal, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, where in the hell is the exhaust fan? There's no exhaust fan. They spared no expense for this beautiful $4.5 million home. I was cooking on a $15,000 stove, and not a single vent inside. Well, there actually was a vent inside. They had a non-motor driven fan, because God forbid you actually hear the whooshing noise of a hood or exhaust fan while your private chef is cooking for you. And so they had like this non-fan driven vent right above the stove. So I start searing something, and I bet you can guess what happened. Immediately, the kitchen fills with smoke. We have to open windows, uh, and the fire alarm goes off. Chef, this isn't a professional kitchen. You can't smoke up the house like this. Oh my God, we have people coming in, 5 minutes. It was really tough to hold my tongue, but they were paying me $5,000 to make an appearance, so whatever. Point being this. The number one thing that is overlooked in any home kitchen is your hood. People buy these microwaves. I have one. I didn't buy it. It came with the house. But I have a microwave over my stove, which I hate. I'm about ready to take a sledgehammer to it. And it has one of those exhaust fans on the bottom, and it works awfully. It works horrible, okay? It's a total piece of shit. And most hoods are. Most hoods that you right now listening to me in your visualize your home kitchen. Chances are you have a shitty hood above your stove. And in this scenario, it doesn't matter how much you paid for your stove, whether it's gas, electric, induction. It doesn't really matter. Okay, the stove itself is not the issue. What's the issue is the hood above your stove, because without it, you can't really do any professional cooking. Because professional cooking, we cook hot and fast. That's a big part of our execution. You're searing, you're sauteing, you have multiple pans going at once. I could easily, just for one singular dish, have 2 or 3 pans on the stove all over high heat. I got my reduction sauce going in the back. Maybe I deglaze with some red wine. I got flames shooting up. I got the saute pan up front where I'm sauteing my vegetable side, and I have my searing steak. God forbid I'm roasting something in the oven at 500 degrees, which is the temperature I usually like to rock at. Usually for me, for an oven, like my oven needs 2 settings at home. I need a setting for 250 degrees, and I need a setting for 500 degrees, preferably 550 degrees, right, with a convection fan. So I can roast, I can go high and fast, or I can go 250 low and slow for my roasting or my braising or my whatever. The 325 to 350 range is a fairly useless setting. Now, if you want to roast a chicken and have it be kind of, decent skin and decent interior in about an hour, hour and a half, 350, 375 is about the only time I ever will use it. But normally That's because when I'm roasting that chicken, which I'm going to spatchcock, I'm going to take out the backbone. You've seen my technique where I go high and fast, where I just pour some water over the skin, and then pop it in the oven at 475, 500 degrees, which will smoke up your house if you don't have a good hood. Um, when I do 375, it's because I'm not in a hurry, and it's not because the chicken comes out better, but it's usually because I want to get about an hour to an hour and a half worth of work done before I eat dinner, and I'm waiting for my rice to finish because the zojirushi takes about an hour to cook. By the way, how many people bought a zojirushi based on last week's podcast? I'm just curious. I know there was definitely some people in the audience that bought a couple of zojirushis. So when you're going through your kitchen and you're looking to spend some money on it in your home, the first thing you should be looking to buy is an upgraded hood. The first thing. And what hood should you get? The most expensive one that you can afford. If you don't need to call on a professional to run the ducting and things like that, then it's not expensive enough. Now, people will balk at the fact that you go and you look at like the hood I'm going to put in my kitchen is the professional grade wolf hood. Sits right above the range, and they run you about $2,000 before you go to install them. Right? People are like, oh my god, $2,000 on a hood, and it's worth every penny. Because I can take a Burton brand induction burner, okay, and it's unfortunately it's not. There's no association between me, Jacob Burton, and the Burton brand induction burner. But that's what I use. You can get them off Amazon for like $90, and they're solid, right? I can take two of those, drop them on top of the shittiest stove in the world, and a couple of induction pans, and I'm in business. I got two high intensity burners that I can sear steaks on, I can saute on, right? That's not the issue. But if every time I go to sear a steak or to do a stir fry or saute something, the house is filling up with smoke, that definitely is an issue. So spend your money there first. And then you're going to just be way happier when you step into the kitchen and cook. Because remember, there's hot and fast, and there's low and slow. There's really no in between. How many times have you heard me say put something over medium heat? Maybe two, and I was probably wrong. I was probably just because there's times where I quibble, right? I say, oh, I'm just gonna really it should be high heat, but I'm gonna tell them medium high so they don't freak out because for people hate putting their stuff over high flame. Why? Because they have a shitty hood. They don't want to set off the smoke alarms. So go out and buy yourself a good hood. Yeah, Cold Heat says the ducting guy in my house got lazy and didn't put the vent to go outside. Yeah, I had the exact same thing happen to me in two of my previous houses that I rented. Right, they stick those again those microwave exhaust fans above your stove, and I had one that it actually vented to the cupboard space above my stove where the microwave was mounted, right? So you have the cupboard above your stove, and the microwave is mounted underneath. I moved in. I think I stuck my salad spinner up there because I never used my salad spinner. I break it out like twice, once to make sure I really don't like using it, and a second time to shoot a video on how to wash your salad greens. I'm like, hey, by the way, you can drop in the salad spinner. But outside of that, I almost never use it. So I stuck it up there. 6 months into living at this place, I decided, hey, maybe I'll just check up here, maybe drop a box of cereal or something. And it was completely covered in that greasy, grimy, like fuzzy soot that you get when you don't clean your grease off of your oven for a long time. Completely gross. So, and that was the thing too. When we were looking at houses, right? I would, when we decided that we were actually going to finally purchase, the real estate agent would drive us around. The first thing I would do is I would go and I would look at the kitchen, and I didn't really care about the kitchen how it was laid out because I can always take a sledgehammer to it and redo it later, right? But I would specifically look at the ducting above where they mounted the microwave, and you'd be surprised at how many people they mount a microwave. And you'll see, I mean, next time you're looking at homes like on Zillow or something, and they have the kitchen pictures, you'll see the free hanging shelves or the free hanging cupboards above the stove, which is pretty common. and then you'll see a microwave mounted on top, but between the cupboard and the ceiling, right, there's no ducting. There's an empty space, and you look at that and you go, "Oh, these assholes, they went straight from the vent into the cupboard, and they just expect me to live my life with greasy cupboards." So, by the first thing you do when you go to remodel a kitchen is you upgrade your hood, and I guarantee you your life will instantly get better. Let's see. Would love some tips to get full use out of it. My man's back in the room, completely worthless. Yeah, that's that's the problem. When they vent it back into the room, and it smokes out your entire room. You may as well not even have a hood. So, um, that's why if you're in one of these situations, having an induction burner that you can just take outside and drop it on, whatever table you have out there, and you run an extension cord. That's a good workaround in the summertime. But right now, I mean, I got 6 feet or 6 inches of snow outside, right? And it's freezing cold. I want to be able to sear a steak in my house. I don't want to have to sit outside shivering with an induction burner because I don't have a vent that works properly. Now, also too, kind of along those same lines, besides uh, having a professional grade hood in your kitchen if you're serious about cooking, I feel like people get too caught up in their equipment in general. You see people with chef knives that are 3, 4, $500. These really really high end stoves, which are awesome. Um, Copper pans hanging above their center island in their kitchen that they never use, right? Because God forbid you got to polish them. I mean, they're total pain in the ass to polish them, right? And they spend hundreds of dollars on all these pan sets, maybe thousands, and they equip their kitchen so when you walk in, you go, "Hey, a serious cook lives here." Right? Except if you are a serious cook, you look around and you're like, these copper pans look like they're brand freaking new, and these Calphalon pans over here, they don't have a single little smudge of carbon on them, right? And this stove how is this stove so clean? Do they ever even use it? And then when you walk into a professional kitchen, and I assume that people want to, they tune into these incoherent ramblings because they're hoping to get some sort of little nuggets of knowledge on how a professional chef, somebody who's actually people pay to eat, his food, they want to know what are your secrets. Why is your food so good that people actually pay you to eat it, and you can pay your bills off of what you cook. And it's because I understand the basic building blocks, the basic techniques, which you guys all know about: flavor, structure, technique, execution. You've been listening to the podcast long enough. And if you haven't, welcome. We get new people every day. Uh, but you walk into a professional kitchen, you got cooks that they're not highly paid professionals, right? They're not using $300 chef's knives. They're using a $20, $30 banger that they got down, at the local restaurant supply store, and they're using aluminum pans that they've hammered out a bunch of times over saute burners, and one over here is super hot, and if you go too low, it'll turn off on you right in the middle of the service. And you got another one over here that never gets that hot, so you're constantly juggling back and forth, and you're finding this timing. And I feel like a lot of people that don't cook professionally, they use the lack of good equipment as an excuse to why their food isn't that good, when really they just lack the basic fundamentals, right? They lack the basic understanding of flavor, structure, and technique. Now, I will say that I'm a bit confused because we are 28 minutes into this live broadcast, and while I see comments in our Discord channel, I don't see a single comment on the Facebook page, even though we have people tuning in. So if you're commenting on the Facebook page, on the Facebook live stream, for whatever reason, I'm not seeing it. So if you could maybe just drop in if you're watching this, drop in a little hello or something, so I know the comments are working. But my comment section is completely empty. And based on the technical difficulties I was having before we got going here, I'm thinking maybe there's something wrong. All right, so we also had some discussion around sauteing aromatics and why we start sauteing our aromatics in oil versus just a dry pan or throwing all of your ingredients into a pot at once. And the reason is this: because it's tradition, because I said so. That's what chefs used to tell me. I don't pay you to think, I pay you to cook, right? Get in there and cook. Don't ask me questions. They're confusing. Now, when you're sauteing aromatics, the most classic ones being your mirepoix, which is celery, onions, and carrots. Think about back to the flavor structure video where we talk about F is for flavor in the Culinary Bootcamp lecture series. And what's one of the main components that gives food its complexity of flavor? Chef, do you want to run down of hood, searing, venting, combo? Okay, so sorry, I don't mean to get off track here, but it does look like there are comments on the Facebook side. I'm not seeing them. See, this is what drives me freaking nuts about this whole thing. Where are my comments? It's literally empty. What is going on here? I wonder if I bring up another tab or something. I'm getting the Discord comments. Bear with me here. I know this is just riveting content, but your live comments are my favorite part of the whole show. Huh? Look at this. So I got 38 comments. So I pulled up another tab. Oh my God. I'm sitting here thinking that people have just completely lost interest. Frickin' Facebook. All right, so then how do I get into this thing here? So I'm in another tab. Now I can kind of see you guys' comments, but it's limited, right? Like I can only see a couple. Now I got to expand. I click on comments. Oh my goodness. This whole thing. So frustrating. So frustrating. Let me see here. Go back. Go forward. View post. Okay, now I'm scrolling. So weird. So it's showing me that I have 42 comments at current, and I can only see 4 of them. Huh. Yeah, okay. Gregory from Facebook. Thanks for, so one of our amazing mods is Quat Malo. She's copying and pasting some comments over from Facebook. So thanks, Quat, for helping us out here. But please explain when a cook can add baking soda to salt and pepper and herb coating meat, and what this does for the meat. See, that's a great question. That's something I've been thinking about for a while now, and I have a whole spiel on this. All right, and it goes great with our mirepoix. And this is why it's so important to have these live comments going. So we might have to switch over to YouTube in a week or two, because at least YouTube live streaming, they have the comments seem to work better, but it's also harder to stream to that platform. I'm a chef. I'm not a live. I mean, I guess I am a live streaming guy now, but it's not my forte. It's not my expertise, right? I just get on here and spiel the cooking stuff. Okay, so here's the thing, and here's something that we'll be expanding on later on. I might actually be adding a new section, either the F-Step curriculum or the written Culinary Bootcamp book. Now, what people, I think, miss sometimes. So remember back in last week's podcast episode, which had way less technical difficulties, and I was just on fire, right? We were talking all sorts of craziness, about flavor structure and technique, and the conversation came up about salt and pepper, right? And how I was talking about how salt is a seasoning and pepper is a flavoring. Now, I think where people get lost sometimes is they can't separate out just because of a lack of general knowledge. They can't separate out active ingredients versus non-active ingredients. Or another way to think of this is ingredients that are there for flavor or ingredients that are there to actually do something, to accomplish something. So things like baking soda, um, egg whites, yeast, salt to a certain extent, they're all there to accomplish something and accomplish something usually in a physical way or a textural way, I guess is the better way to explain it. So if you take baking soda and you don't add it to your pancake recipe, it's not going to rise properly, right? You're going to have dense pancakes. So the baking soda is actually doing something beyond flavor structure. It's actually making a physical change to your recipe. Whereas if you don't add vanilla extract to your pancake recipe, well, then it's just not going to have that vanilla flavor component, but it'll have other components. You could have brown sugar, it could have malt, it could have, any sort of thing, right? So the baking soda is actually they're actively doing something, whereas the vanilla is just a personal preference. Now, most people tend to enjoy the vanilla flavor, and what happens is you grow up eating pancakes, and almost every pancake recipe you've ever eaten has vanilla in it. So if you leave the vanilla extract out, then the pancake might even taste a little off to you. Like, why does this pancake kind of taste like so, not like pancakey? Well, because vanilla is a major flavor component in a pancake. But this is usually the first place that I start when I start creating my own recipes or doing plays on stuff. We've talked a few times about how we'll actually take something that is a familiar reference point, like our beef stroganoff, right? Or like the pot roast, and then we'll start switching things up. We'll start applying some different techniques to it. We'll start applying some off the wall flavor structures to it, and it makes it fun. It makes it interesting, and it's really kind of simplistic when you break it down. But most people taste that pot roast and they think to themselves like, "God, why does this pot roast taste so good?" Or why, I never would have thought to, add short rib to my beef stroganoff instead of the normal, lower end beef, and use morel mushrooms instead of cremini mushrooms, right? But when you start telling yourself, well, these ingredients are here just for flavor, they're not actually doing anything for the success of the recipe as far as making it work, then you can start getting a lot more creative because now you're just asking yourself about flavor structure, right? So then you go into our aromatics. When we say aromatics, a lot of the times in Western cuisine, we're talking about the classic French aromatics because the French are the people who kind of revolutionized and codified Western cooking, and a lot of the forms of Western cooking that we currently have are derived from the structure that the French has set up, right? So we're using carrots, celery, and onions, which is your basic mirepoix. But you go into other cuisines, their technique doesn't change a whole lot, right? They're still sweating their aromatics in the bottom of a pot when using or when creating a flavor base for their soup because they've discovered either through learning or through technique or just trial and error that it's gives you a better flavor, and we'll get into why here in a second. But instead of using carrots, celery, and onions, right? If you're in Thai cuisine, maybe you're using some lemongrass, ginger, galangal, and garlic. In Chinese cuisine, some really important flavor combinations as far as aromatic wise. They'll use a lot of green onions and garlic and ginger, and then you have some of the spices that make up five spice like star anise and clove and some cinnamon stick. Right. Again, these are all flavor structures items, right? These are all things that change and enhance the flavor. So, with our beef stroganoff example that we really got into last week, one of the things I mentioned was doing a stir fry style approach for kind of taking taking a play out of the Chinese cuisine stir fry book, which is slicing our beef thin and doing an alkaline marinade on it, right, using baking soda. So the alkalinity or the baking soda, which shifts the pH up, and Gregory, this is to your question, right? And I'm going to review your comments here in a second, so just bear with me. I kind of see them streaming in, so I appreciate you guys kind of hanging in there, and we will get the technical issues kind of ironed out. Okay, so with the baking soda, what happens is in a lot of Western style marinades, we shift the pH downwards, and we shift it downwards using an acid. So in a lot of marinades, you'll see vinegars, you see lemon juice, lime juice, right? What this does is it creates partial protein coagulation, where you have the tight protein strands. They start to unravel, and that creates some tenderness. And it also will break down the collagen a little bit, which is another form of protein in a triple helix of gelatin. So you have the triple helix, you have the 3 strands of gelatin that wrap up really tightly, and they form the collagen. A little bit of acid on that will help to break it down. You also have enzymatic reactions from things like papain, that you'll see in tenderizers and seasonings, that you can also use as a marinade. Now, along those exact same lines, in a but less common in Western cooking, is what you see in Eastern cooking, where they, instead of shifting the pH down, they shift it up, and it makes the meat tender, but in a different way. And that's also how you get sort of that, when it's done properly, and you have those really tender pieces of meat in a stir fry. They're so delicious, and I prefer those over the acidic style of marinades for the most part, because those acidic styles of marinades will, a lot of the times, they'll over coagulate the proteins, um, and it's harder to kind of catch and to stop that process than it is with alkalinity. So for those of you who've ever made ceviche, where you're fully coagulating the seafood proteins by using a lot of acid, and usually with lime juice, then you understand that when you let the fish sit in that lime juice or that acid substrate for too long, it becomes dry and sort of almost mealy and grainy. So, um, and for me, I don't really like that. I don't like that texture. When you shift the pH upwards, a couple of things happen. The same thing happens where it becomes tender, but it gets almost this velvet, silky, smooth tenderness, which can also come from the velveting process, which we'll talk about in a second. Um, but also too, and I need to do a whole video series on this. What happens is, for those of you who have can think back to our discussions on the Maillard reaction, which is non-enzymatic browning. You cut an apple open, right? The flesh of the apple, if exposed to air for too long, starts to brown. That's enzymatic browning, right? There's an enzymatic reaction that causes that apple to brown. Non-enzymatic browning is the Maillard reaction, which you get from searing meat or from cooking meat. And it's really this very complex chemical reaction, that also, during this chemical reaction, that changes the meat from its uncooked color to its brown, delicious, juicy looking color. Um, Part of this chemical reaction is creating new compounds that give off intense aromas, and it's these aroma compounds, or these aroma molecules, that give us a lot of our sense of taste. If you think back to our F is for flavor lecture in the F-step curriculum, you have our basic tastes, like salty, sour, sweet, bitter, umami, that kind of give you that base level. But all of our complexity comes from aroma, right? And aroma is fat soluble, which is why in a lot of recipes you'll see people start uh, by sweating their mirepoix, which is cooking their aromatics over a low heat with some oil, because carrot, celery, onions, and most other forms of aromatics, whether it's ginger, galangal, garlic, whatever, doesn't have any fat in it. So if you just tried to, if you started by skipping the whole sweating phase, and then just, threw it in a pot with a little bit of, say, like white wine, and started your wine reduction, which is very common to do after the sweating phase, you're going to lose some flavor. You're not going to be really building up that actual flavor base. Okay, so along those exact same lines, when you shift the pH up on meat for your Chinese style or your Asian style marinade, which is also why you see me putting baking soda in a brine, in a regular 5% brine, the Maillard reaction is pH dependent. So, if you're cooking mushrooms and you don't want your mushrooms to brown, which you'll sometimes see if you're making like a white mushroom sauce, right? You'll very commonly see the mushrooms sweated in a little bit of oil or a little bit of butter, and you add lemon juice right up front. It's also too why when I'm making my tonkatsu style ramen broth, which is a pork style broth, that usually has a lot of fat sort of emulsified into it, and you want it to be white and milky, and you don't want a whole lot of color to it. But when you make a stock and you simmer it for say 12 to 18 hours, which what you would normally do with a ramen stock, what happens is you have these proteins that stick to the side of the pot and coagulate and start to brown. So even if you've never actually roasted your bones, the stock itself will start to turn brown over the process of cooking. And people are always like, "What the hell? Why is my tonkatsu ramen stock? Why is it turning beige or brown?" Even though I've never roasted the bones, and that's why, because you have these proteins over time that coagulate, they stick to the pot, and you'll see them, kind of turn your stock brown. So that's why when I'm making that stock, I will blanch those bones first, which is always best practice. We're not roasting your bones. We talked about this in our stock episode, episode 2 of the Stella Culinary School podcast. But I'll also add in a good splash of white vinegar. And that white vinegar, it drops the pH, right, which will retard the Maillard reaction. It'll keep it from happening as efficiently, and it'll help to keep my ramen broth the same from turning dark. So then the converse of that is when you shift the pH upward, the Maillard reaction happens faster, it happens easily. So the higher your pH is in a dish, the higher your pH is in a meat, the more readily and the faster it will brown, and the more evenly it will brown. And along the same lines, the more complex the aroma of the browning meat will be, and that shifts directly into the actual overall flavor, because 70 to 75% of what we taste actually comes from our sense of smell, the aroma of that food. So when I take a chicken breast and I brine it in a regular 5% brine, meaning that the water has by weight 5% salt and then 3% sugar, and the sugar is there to help to kind of counterbalance the harshness of the salt and for a little bit of flavor structure as well. If I put that side by side with a chicken breast that I put in what I call an alkaline brine, which is 5% salt, 5% sugar, and 0.5% of baking soda, right? The chicken breast that was in the alkaline brine, it's going to brown better. It's going to brown more evenly. It's going to brown deeper and have a much more aroma, right? So that's why you'll commonly see me when I'm doing stir fries or when I'm brining stuff. A lot of times I'm adding pH. Now, in traditional sort of Chinese style stir fries, they also have what's called a velveting process, which they will take egg whites and they'll coat the slices of meat with egg whites and other ingredients for flavor. So they'll add like a dash of soy, they'll add some MSG, right? But the egg whites are high in pH, right? So they are alkaline. And so in this scenario, the egg white would actually be your active ingredient. It's what's actually tenderizing the meat. The soy sauce and the MSG and whatever else you put in there is more for flavor structure. Now, an argument can be made that the salt in the soy sauce is also helping to break down the proteins and it's basically like their version of a brine, right? Because you have that salinity, and that would be true. But you separate it out in the sense that you can substitute the soy sauce for really anything that you want. Now, I wouldn't, right? I'm a big fan of the soy sauce and fish sauce combination, sometimes with a little bit of MSG, even if I'm doing a Western style dish, because the synergistic relationship that creates that umami gives you a really beautiful taste. And now I could take that same meat that I started with this sort of Asian flavor structure, Asian marinade process. I can drop some demi-glace over the top after I pan roast or saute it, and you would never think it was an Asian-inspired dish because it tastes nothing like it, right? It tastes very, Western in its actual overall finish flavor structure. But you'd be like, God damn, how does that Chef Jacob get his meat to be so tender and so flavorful? And he must be using, a really high-end meat. And while I'm not using the basement bottom of the barrel cheap stuff, right? It's the process and it's that technique. So when you're velveting something, you coat it with egg whites and you throw in your other ingredients, you let sit. I like to add in a little bit of baking soda. Some people will argue that it's not necessary, but I like that little extra shift upwards of pH. Of course, I like my MSG because it makes things taste delicious. I'm not scared of it. And you coat it with a little bit of cornstarch, and this cornstarch helps for the marinade to cling to this. Now, if I'm not doing the velveting process, which is dipping it in oil, right, then I won't add the egg whites because the egg whites are a little bit too sticky when those proteins coagulate. So when I normally at home, I almost never velvet, okay, because it adds excess fat to the dish and it kind of makes it a little bit more unhealthy because you go through this whole frying step. But also too, it's kind of unnecessary. The alkaline marinade with the baking soda, with a little bit of soy sauce and the fish sauce and whatever other ingredients you want in there, a little bit of cornstarch to help everything kind of cling to the meat. When you go and you stir fry those that coated meat in a wok, really is the best way to do it. The moisture in the meat itself, what is it going to do? It's going to start to turn into steam as it gets hot. It's going to mix with the cornstarch, which is already hydrated. When that cornstarch coating hits the boiling point of water, the same reason why when you add a cornstarch slurry to your stock and bring it to a boil, it thickens, right? That coating is going to set on the meat and it's going to act as a moisture barrier. So now you have this really thin cornstarch coating on the meat that you don't even know is there. It's imperceptible because it's so thin, and it's setting up a starch gel that's actually trapping the moisture in the meat as it tries to escape. All right, and you're still going to have some moisture escape, but remember way back in the day, one of our favorite dogmas, which isn't true, is that you sear meat to lock in the juices, right? Which we know doesn't happen. You sear meat because brown meat is yummy. Okay. However, when you have that cornstarch coating on the top, you actually do lock in some juices. It's not an impermeable layer, but what's happening is you actually have a starch coating on these slices of meat that gelates when it hits a boiling temperature, and it absorbs the moisture from the meat that it's coating and also whatever sauce you decide to put in the pan. Now, when you do the velveting step, what you're doing, you're adding this extra step where now you have the egg whites mixed with your cornstarch. And then right before you actually drop them into hot oil, which is usually a lower temperature, anywhere from 250 to 325, depending upon who you ask and what technique and recipe you're following. But I'll take a little bit of extra oil and add it to this marinade right at the end. And what that does just helps to kind of get in between the pieces of meat that are heavily sticking together and separate them. Now you do a quick little bath in this oil, and it's a par cook stage, right? And what this is doing is the oil is more efficiently and fully setting that starch coating that partially sets when you just skip the egg whites and you do a normal stir fry, which I just discussed, right? So what this does, it's a par cooking step that sets this starchy outer coating, but because the coating is so thin, it sets it up in a manner where it's kind of imperceptibly there. But what it does is when you add in your stir fry sauce, it absorbs the sauce. And so now you have this meat that is extremely juicy, right? Because it's covered in a thin layer of sauce. But you can't tell because it's not gloppy. I mean, you're like your sweet and sour pork, right? Sweet and sour pork obviously has a coating, obviously has a thick, sugary sauce on it. But in general, right? When you're eating, say, a chow mein, okay, and you have those tender pieces of meat in the chow mein, you don't know that they're velveted, right? You're just like, man, how do they get these chunks of chicken to be so tender and juicy? Well, they velvet them, and then they add them to the stir fry later on. So you go through a par cooking stage where you're basically par cooking your marinated strips of meat in this oil, and then you allow it to cool, and you drain it on a paper towel, and you set it aside for later. Now, if you're going to do this, a very, very common step that a lot of people miss is on the pickup. So now I'm making, say, let's say some broccoli beef, okay? I'm going to take my broccoli, I'm going to give it a quick blanch, and this is, again, this is your mise en place, this is your setup step, okay? I'm going to give that a quick blanch, probably slice up some onions, slice up some carrots, maybe give the carrots a quick blanch, so that way I can hit them with a quick stir fry. So the blanching stage, where you're dropping it in boiling water, then shocking in ice, is really there just to set the texture, okay? To kind of get it to where you want it to be, because we're going to cook it so hot and so fast that we're not going to have a whole lot of time to set the interior texture. We're just going for a browning on the outside. And that's a common thing that people miss, in home cooking versus professional cooking, is we very common in kitchens, we apply a two-step cooking process. The first one is to set the interior texture. How do you like your carrots to be cooked? Do you like them kind of mushy? Do you like them a little bit crunchy? Do you like them cooked all the way through? Right? You set that texture in your mise en place stage while you're blanching. Then on your pickup stage, all you're worried about is heating that food through again and getting whatever exterior finish you want on it. So if you want them to not have any browning, then I'd probably heat them in a little bit of stock with maybe some butter and some salt and pepper. And now you're going to have something that eats more like a poached carrot. And that's not really a good use of blanching and mise en place, but you get the point, right? Now, if you want something that's more like charred and brown and sauteed, well, then you get your pan really hot, you throw your blanched carrots in there, and you saute them up. Same thing with doing a stir fry. So now what I'm going to do in this scenario is I'm in a home kitchen, so I don't have these big jet gas burners that you would in a normal, Asian restaurant. So I'm going to just work in smaller batches. So I'm going to stir fry up my onions over high heat, set those aside, let my wok recover over a high flame, put in a little bit of oil, and then I'm going to stir fry up my carrots. Put those aside. Now the broccoli goes next. So now I have a whole, plate piled with my vegetables that are charred and ready to go. The step that people miss is this. On the side, next to your wok or in the back corner, you want a boiling pot of water. Now, a lot of the times, what you do when you velvet meat is you actually don't, you don't do a final stir fry in the sense that you're not looking to get color. Now you can, but it's normally you would do a non-velveted, where you just have your cornstarch and your baking soda, right? You would use that sort of approach if you wanted a brown stir-fried meat. If you look at the slivers of beef in your um, whatever beef dish you're having at the local Chinese restaurant, like whether it's beef and broccoli or Mongolian beef, they normally aren't brown in the traditional sense. They're evenly coated brown, which means that they're cooking them longer in the oil when they actually go through the velveting process, or they're frying them crispy, which you kind of commonly see in Mongolian beef. Now, when you're par cooking, when you're doing this velveting process in this oil and you're setting up that starch coating, it becomes oily, right? It makes sense, especially since you're technically frying, right, at a lower temperature. And what do we know about frying? Well, when you fry food, you want to fry at a higher temperature, so the moisture in that meat turns to steam, it pushes outward, and as long as you see that steam pushing outward in this hot oil, then you know that oil really can't soak into the meat. Versus poaching the meat in hot oil, like you do in the velveting process, you're absorbing a lot of oil on the surface of this meat. So after I'm done sautéing all my vegetables, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll get the wok hot and either add my vegetables back in if I don't want to actually stir fry the meat and get it brown. But I have a pasta basket in my boiling water, and I drop my meat that's already been velveted back into this boiling water for like 10-15 seconds, right? And what that does is it helps to bring the core of the meat up to temperature. But more importantly, what it does is it releases the oil from the surface, and this keeps my stir fry from being greasy. And this is a very, very commonly missed step, right? So what this does is it now releases that oil from the surface. I then pull the pasta pot or the pasta basket out of this water. I shake it off. Now there's gonna be some residual water on this meat, which is good. It's gonna that water is gonna act as our deglazer, right? It's also going to act as steam. It's going to bring some steam to the party. Now, if you have an excess amount of oil in your wok and it's really hot, expect some flames to shoot out of your wok when you do this step, right? But then you take your meat that's been dropped into the water, the oil comes off, you shake it off as you bring it out of the basket, you drop it into your wok, it sizzles, it steams, and you toss it around, and then you finish with your sauce. Okay. So that's the process of velveting, but also too, that's a really long answer for Gregory as to why you would add baking soda to meat in a stir fry scenario. But it goes to our larger conversation that we've been having, and that we'll always really have. We'll always, every time we talk about cooking, whenever applicable, which is almost always, we'll always be looking at cooking through the lens of the F-step breakdown, right? Which is always separating flavor structure and technique and execution. Those are your main components. And the more you can think of separating flavor and technique, the more versatility and creativity you'll have in the kitchen. It seems really obvious to my long-term listeners. I understand that, but the point can be drilled time and time and time again because you'll be surprised at how many people get lost in the recipe, right? And they think that the recipe is the recipe and the flavor is the flavor, and you can't really deviate from it too much. So by separating the flavor structure and the technique is being you're using the baking soda, which is your active ingredient. You're shifting the pH up in your meat, right? You're going through the velveting process if you want it, right? That's your technique. The flavors can be anything on top. Okay, so a lot of times, even when I'm doing a Western style saute, or I'm working with a Western style dish with meat that I want to be tender, you see me a lot of times sprinkling in some Asian technique, but you wouldn't know it when you eat it. Um, all right. Did you get your Innova Combi oven? Not yet. I got a notification that it shipped the other day. So I will give you guys an update on that. Okay, let's go. And let's scroll through some of your comments here. Again, I appreciate everybody their patience with me on this. Your comments are really important to the podcast. It's really my favorite part of the podcast. And if I do say so, I think that they've brought a new level of energy to the podcast. And they're I mean, it's a good interaction. So give me a moment to stream through. Um, so Kevin was asking about sauce splatters, and that's just unfortunately sauce splatters getting everywhere. That's kind of the cost of doing business in the kitchen. You can use those splatter guards, which you stick over the pan. And I have some. It's basically a wire, like a tight wire mesh screen that you stick over the pan, and it keeps some of the bigger droplets from shooting through. But yeah, a lot of times there's no way around it. There's a ton of chat activity on Facebook feed. Something must be wrong. So that's good to know. Sometimes I just thought I was just sitting here talking to myself. Um, let's see. Please, okay, that's the baking soda one. Stream to Discord next time. Yeah, a lot of people are saying click on the three dots. I tried to click on the three dots, and because it's my post, it's giving me a whole different drop down menu. So the three dot clicking this is really weird. I've never seen this happen before, where it's limiting my comments that I can see. So it looks like just the newer ones first. I'm gonna take a screenshot and post it later to the Facebook feed, so you guys can actually see what's going on. But it's really bizarre. Let me see. I got more. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. John Fitch. Beef fajitas usually come out good, but last night I cooked them as usual, cut against the grain, but still ended up kind of chewy. Could that be a quality of meat problem or me problem? If it's quality of meat, what should I look for instead of skirt? So skirt can be tough and chewy. It just kind of happens. And I think for beef fajitas, which are anytime you guys are working with thin slices of meat that you want to be tender, uh, use the alkaline marinade process that we just went through. And again, I almost never velvet at home. I don't think it's really necessary. But you take your slices of fajita meat, hit it with a little bit of baking soda, any other flavors that you want in there, a little bit of salt, and don't use, just a little sprinkling of baking soda. You get too crazy with it, it's going to make everything taste soapy. But in the sense of beef fajitas, if you're struggling with tender strips of meat, a little bit of baking soda, a little bit of salt, whatever other flavors you want in there, let it marinate for at least a couple of hours, preferably overnight, and then cook as you normally would cook. And you're going to have a much better outcome. Um, I would like to add potato starch to my flour when deep frying. Will cornstarch work just as well? Yeah. I tend to use cornstarch because it's more available. I've used potato starch in the past. I don't see a massive difference between the two. So it kind of depends on what your personal preference is. But my overall uh, dredging and frying mix, and it depends on what I'm going for. But a really good one is tapioca starch. Not your tapioca maltodextrin, but the tapioca starch or tapioca flour adds a really nice textural element that I like. It's hard to explain, but it's almost like it'll make your coating a little bit more shattering, right? So instead of cornstarch, what I prefer to use is about 50% all-purpose flour, 25% rice flour, which kind of gives you a more like a sturdy structure, crispy but not delicate, right? And then 25% tapioca starch. That tapioca starch gives you that sort of shattering, crackly thing. Now, when we're talking about flour dredges or coatings for frying or browning, a lot of the browning happens because of the proteins in the flour, right? So like the gluten and the gliadin, the same things that we talk about when making our bread, right? That's protein, and it's the protein that's going to brown first. So if you coat something in cornstarch, you will notice that it takes longer to brown, and it's almost impossible to burn. So I do these velveted chicken wings, which I love. So you go through the whole velveting process with the egg white marinade and the cornstarch, but then when it comes time to fry, I'll add more cornstarch so it's more like a batter. And instead of doing the velveting process where I cook and chill, I just drop the chicken wings straight into the fryer and let them rip for about 12 minutes for the jumbo chicken wings at 350. And they're really delicious. They come out crispy and coated and breaded, and you can toss them in a sauce. You can eat them as is if you like them crispy. But what you'll notice using the cornstarch in this manner is in about 3 minutes, the chicken wings in 350-degree oil will look perfectly brown, and you're going to think to yourself, "Oh shit, I got 9 minutes left in this cook. They're going to surely be burnt by the time this is all done." But then you get to the 12-minute mark and they're almost exactly the same color they were at 3 minutes. This is because the pure starch in your coating is actually harder. It's you need more heat for a longer period of time to burn it. So if you're having issues when you're creating a breading or a coating for whatever it is that you're cooking, by diluting that coating with a pure starch, like a cornstarch or a tapioca starch or a potato starch, it will retard some of the browning by cutting down on the overall protein percentage and give you a little bit more wiggle room there. Going through, alkaline, totally different texture. Yeah, so Ed says when I make alkaline noodles for my ramen, I use baked baking powder added to the water to make more alkaline. So baking the baking powder it intensifies the pH. This is because it's harder. It used to be a lot harder to find consoy, which is the alkaline substance that's commonly used in and ramen noodles. That's a whole other thing. We can get into ramen noodles, but his question is, it adds tooth to the noodle, more chewy with a totally different texture. Do you know what the scientific reason for this is? Yeah, it's mainly it's the cross linking of the proteins. It makes a more sturdy protein structure in the noodle, which makes them more chewy. Um, have you tried the Brava oven? I have not. I did chicken wings, 350, 7 minutes, egg white seasoning, fine milled flour plus cornstarch. Came out fantastic. Yep, that's very similar to my approach. I tend to use the bigger jumbo wings, but if you're using it for the normal wings that you get at the supermarket, or that come off of like a 4 or 5 pound chicken, 7 to 8 minutes is going to be the mark that you like. Do, 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 do. How do I duplicate that packet sauce in Chinese fast food noodles? It's yummy. Yeah, so normally a lot of those sauces are just a combination of a white chicken stock or a broth, and in Chinese cuisine, a lot of times they'll blanch and they'll use a whole chicken and they'll simmer it for 45 minutes. So their broth is really delicate, but it has a really chickeny flavor. And then sometimes, especially in more like sort of fast food style Americanized Chinese restaurants, they'll cheat and they'll add a little bit of that chicken base, which to me, I mean, it's game on, right? I'm a fan of the chicken base because it's basically just concentrated chicken flavor, right? And then it's soy sauce, a little bit of rice wine vinegar, usually some sugar, a little bit of MSG, and then an oyster sauce or um, dark soy sauce, other thick sauces, and they just sometimes some cornstarch to thicken it, but they're usually pretty straightforward and simple. Now, when I do stir fries at home, I usually finish off right at the end with just a couple dashes of soy sauce, a little splash of a boxed chicken stock, and it gives you enough moisture in that pan to where when you fully reduce it, it's going to cling to the food. It's not going to be like a glazy reduction sauce, but it's going to give you that moisture and that juiciness that you're looking for. John says the comments are our favorite part too. I know. I mean, and look at, let's not, what I hate more than arrogant people is false modesty. Okay, so finding that balance. Let's just throw something out in the open here real quick. Where else are you going to find a professional chef that sits here every week on a Friday morning and drops some knowledge based on your comments? The comments are the best part. But that's also too why this is the best culinary podcast in the entire multiverse, and I don't have any shame in saying that. And if you know of a better podcast, please drop it in the comments. A better culinary podcast, please drop it in the comments so I can pretend to listen to it, which I won't, and then talk about why it's not better. Because it may be better, but my entire universe is cooking, so I don't watch cooking shows, I don't watch cooking videos, and I don't listen to cooking podcasts because it's what I do all day, every day. Every now and then I will. For Marsala sauce, do I add heavy cream and reduce, or should I add cream at the end and use cornstarch slurry as my thickener? Yeah, so for Marsala, a lot of times when you're cooking your Marsala chicken or Marsala veal or whatever, you are starting by browning the meat over gentle heat or medium heat. I guess that's there's an exception to the rule, right? That's when you use medium heat when you want to brown something that's coated in flour without burning it. And that little bit of residual flour is usually going to add as you're going to be your thickener, and then you can add some cream to thicken it more. I'm not if when you watch my sauce lecture. And we started getting into sauces. I'm not a big fan of starch thickened sauces. They're clunky. They're just not very refined. They don't have really good flavor. Now, again, there's always exceptions to the rules. One of the biggest exception in my uh, opinion is Thanksgiving Day gravy or your basic holiday gravy. The brown roux that you use to thicken it is an important part of the complexity of the flavor. It brings a lot of like nuttiness and that sort of just traditional flavor to the mix that I would miss if I didn't use it. However, people, they over-ruify. That's a new term that we're going to use now. We're going to use it everywhere on the internet. We're going to say over-ruify, and we're just going to wait to see how long it circles back and it pings us with it. But they add too much roux, and because they're in a rush and it thickens it too much. So I like to go an Espanol style approach to my Thanksgiving Day gravy. And Espanol is brown stock plus brown roux plus reduced. So I will take a turkey stock, and I'll make a roasted turkey stock and add in my brown roux, but I'll add enough to where it's not fully thick. It's just there and gives it body. And then I'll do my final thickening through reduction. And that's going to throw off some of your, the proteins that are in the flour, which is that gunk and that scum. So it's going to give me a chance to skim that off. And it's going to give you a much more refined, finished gravy. And, we'll do an episode on Thanksgiving Day gravy. I've touched on it before, but we need to do a full episode. We'll do it in November or coming up later this year, because my Thanksgiving Day gravy is absolutely the best. I mean, if like the whole devil went down to Georgia and you got to like fiddle for your soul. If I was going to fiddle for my soul against the devil, the equivalent of that for me would be Thanksgiving Day gravy. I'd be like, okay, Satan, step up to the plate. All right. And this soul is not going to, you're not going to win it over. Okay. Because my Thanksgiving Day gravy is legit. I will smoke anybody on planet Earth with my Thanksgiving Day gravy. That's my special kitchen skill. That and tourneing, oddly enough, artichokes, which is an awful skill to have. But I can trim down artichokes faster than anybody you've ever met, guaranteed. Okay, so there are more questions coming in. They are hard to keep up with. They're just kind of flying by. We will have a better approach to this in the future. I am actively working on it. I did order a bunch of new audio visual equipment too, which I'm excited about. So I'm just trying to kind of scan through this stuff without getting too long-winded and taking up too much of your time. I think we're about the hour and 20 mark right now, which is about as long as I like to keep these podcasts. Just reviewing your comments here. Setting up for lunch service, but wanted to say hi and loving the content. By the way, I agree with you about not using beef bones and pure pork reductions. Just doesn't work, and it's gross. I love it when my industry peeps check in. It's always nice to know that I have industry peeps. Okay, that's actually something I did want to touch on, because before this whole thing went down, I had my technical difficulties. The world famous Quat Malo, she's like, I still want to know why full pork reductions are gross, chef. I want to know. And Quat is a very intellectual and sciencey, approachy sort of person, which is why we get along so well. And she's like, look, like you touched on it in the last episode. Now I'm just putting words in her mouth, but I want a full breakdown. I demand a full breakdown because pork reductions. Pork is delicious, right? When you reduce something, it concentrates the flavor. So, like, A plus B does equal C. A delicious pork broth reduced down should concentrate that deliciousness, just make it more delicious, right? Chef, explain yourself. I demand it. And here's my explanation. It's very technical, right? And when I tell you this, the reason why it doesn't work, you're going to be like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Okay, you ready? Because I don't like it. I don't like it. It gets too funky. It gets too barnyardy. That's why. That's the only. Now, you might go and do a full reduction and be like, dude, this is awesome. I love it. It's yeah, it has like that porky, delicious funk to it. It's great. Perfect. You know what that means? It means you like it. Doesn't mean my palate's better or worse or whatever, right? It means you like it. And sometimes it's that simple. I've for years talked about separating flavor and technique, but also to this entire podcast, the whole Stella Culinary universe, which somebody the other day asked, who is Stella, right? We'll get into that at a later date. We can't get into it, it's way too long. But the entire universe, man, my entire podcasting and video world was created because I was sick of chefs saying, do it like this because this is how I do it. And I'd be like, bitch, that's just your subjective opinion, right? And the reason why you do it like that is because you never asked why, and because the chef before you did it like that, because he or she never asked why. So that's why I try my best, and sometimes I just we get um, really far in the weeds with breakdowns, and the whole purpose of breakdowns is to give you the knowledge you need to make your own decisions, because so much of cooking, besides just good technique, is subjective opinion. At the end of the day, you're going to be the one serving it, you're going to be the one eating it, right? So learn how to kind of dig in and break things down. And also too, like, it's fun to get stuck in the weeds, it's fun to ask why, and it's fun to kind of peel back the layers of cuisine, and you can answer a lot of questions with food science, right? The hows and whys of cooking, and when you understand the hows and whys, and you understand the food science of things, then you can make better decisions, right? It's like these different, each scientific fact you understand about food is like a key that opens a door. You open enough of these doors, and now you can let the light in from all different directions. And my analogy is awful, but you get what I'm saying. Whereas you can make better informed decisions, which ultimately lead to you producing food that you like more. And that's the whole point of it. In the sofrito conversation, or the aromatic conversation that I saw on the Discord group, one of the things that someone said is, well, did you do a double blind taste test? No, I haven't done a double blind taste test, but I think that the one cooked in oil tastes better. Sometimes that's good enough, right? Like, you gotta understand, as fun as it is to get into the weeds on and double blinding people and doing all these different crazy tests, so that way you can settle the argument once and for all, because food is like a religious belief. Sometimes it's like, you gotta do it this way because that's how it's done, and to think otherwise is just pure blasphemy, and you're going to be ostracized and kicked out of the community, right? But it's at the end of the day, you're the one cooking. Dude, I don't want, if you come to the decision of, look, I don't start my sofrito in oil, and by the time I'm done with my pasta sauce, I can't really tell a difference, or it's a 5% difference, so I'm not going to do that step. That's a perfectly fine argument. And anyone who wants to argue past that point with you normally just wants to sort of beat you over the head with so many scientific facts that you just say, okay, well, obviously you're the better cook out of us, so this conversation is clearly over. All right. Quat says, I legitimately believe you're an asshole, chef. God, Quat, that's kind of harsh. No, I'm just kidding. I legitimately believe it tastes awful, but I was curious what components of pork get nasty when you concentrate them. I fell down the rabbit hole on warm liver flavor, non-castrated boars, and aging time, but nothing told me what I hope to find out. Yeah, sometimes it's just, for lack of a better term, it is what it is. You concentrate the flavor. One of the things, it might have to do with gelatin content as well. If you've ever tasted like pure collagen, they have like those health drinks now where you stir pure collagen into water and you drink it. It tastes kind of has like that funky sort of barnyard taste to it. And where a lot of times where you harvest collagen from most commonly is pork, specifically pork skin has a ton of it. And there's been times in the past where I make a time where I do use the pork reduction is when I'm making head cheese. Which, can you believe, I actually have a really great video on head cheese that I shot at Stella like 8 years ago, and I never edited it. So I might edit that down and drop it as like a bonus somewhere in the community. But you brine the trotters, you brine the heads, you basically simmer them or braise them until they're falling apart and tender, and you have this really gelatinous broth. So it's really important to blanch the trotters and the head first, because if not, it gets real funky real quick. But you reduce it down, and you need just enough of this sticky sort of gelatinous broth to hold your terrine together, hold your meat pieces together, that it doesn't overtake the flavor. And it's served cold, and cold stuff doesn't have as much of a flavor punch as warm things, which is why you season your cold salads more than you would a salad served hot. Which is why if you're making potato salad and your potatoes are still hot when you season it, you always want to taste it again at the end, and check for the seasoning. So same thing with the head cheese. What was my point? Oh yeah, so you can use a pork reduction, but head cheese in general is kind of like expected to have a funky flavor. Now you take that same thing, you reduce it down, you glaze like a pork shank with it, without other ingredients in there. So we actually do a semi pork reduction with a pork shank that we serve at the restaurant right now, but we mount it with a ton of homemade quince jam. So it gives you like the sweet quincy sort of thing, and the pork broth is there more to kind of like round out the flavors and to dilute the jam. Um, Good point. Often wonder how chefs determine the happy medium that satisfies all, and how much is the emperor walking around in the buff. Yeah, and that's just a lot of it. Greg, is just trial and error, right? Can I tell you a little secret? I love telling you guys secrets, and you'll just keep it between us, right? I hate salmon. I do not like salmon. I enjoy salmon nigiri when that's sushi, which, by the way, is not Japanese. It made its way back to Japan, but oddly enough, the Japanese have always seen salmon as a dirty fish, which is true because salmon will go from seawater to freshwater, and because of that, they will get tapeworm. So it was kind of viewed for a long time as a no-no. But the Western cultures, they got their hands on Japanese cuisine or sushi and do what we always do, which is bastardize it to our own liking. Which is also why seaweed, oddly enough, is on the inside of the roll because seaweed was scaring all the white people in LA who were trying to eat it. So they hid the seaweed for your sushi rolls on the inside with the rice on the outside, which again was untraditional, and to kind of hide the fact that you're eating seaweed. And they normally wouldn't serve salmon, but I digress. I like raw salmon nigiri, but I hate salmon. I just don't like it. I think it might be because I've cooked just way too much of it over my career. But here's the thing, to answer your question, Greg. People love salmon. They go nuts for salmon, right? It's you put it on your menu, it's going to be almost always one of your top sellers. So yeah, I have salmon on my menu, right? Would I ever order it? No, I would never order it. I don't like salmon, but I put it on the menu because what's my job? My job is to buy ingredients, fix them up, and sell them for a profit. If I don't have salmon on the menu, I'm missing out on a huge amount of revenue. So I sell lots of salmon. Everything else is just kind of trial and error. You try stuff, and what happens too though is you have to be um, authentic in the sense of you gotta off. So okay, you can't be an arrogant prick, right? You can't say, well, I don't like salmon, so no one gets salmon. I don't like it, no one should like it, right? That would just be stupid. But on the other hand, too, if you try to be everything to everybody, then you'll be nothing to nobody or nothing to everybody, right? Um, Meaning that at a certain point, the most successful restaurants are, besides like corporate concepts like a Taco Bell or whatever, right, which is a whole different beast. But I assume because if you're working in a restaurant and listening to this podcast, I think it's a pretty fair guess to say that your ambitions in life aren't to run a Taco Bell. And if they are, good for you, right? You could probably pick up some good business tips eventually about running it. But it's probably more to be you know, um, a professional chef running your own kitchen, or if you cook at home, right, is to impress your family and friends and serve great food. So you have to be authentic, right? And you'll attract your audience through authenticity, right? You're gonna find people whose palates line up with your palates, and they're gonna come into your restaurant and they're gonna eat and they're gonna love your food because you've kind of created this universe where they say, hey, I found the guy who cooks the food that I love, right? And that's why there's all sorts of different restaurants out there, and why I'm never really concerned about competition because as long as I'm being authentic with my food, you can't compete with me on my food, right? My food is my food, right? So people will come in because they're craving my food, and then maybe next, tomorrow night they're craving the tacos from the guy down the street, and then after that they're craving the fish stew from the guy on the other side of the block. So as long as you're authentic, you're going to attract your audience, and then you're also going to have people who kind of straggle in and eat your food and not like it, and they're going to go on Yelp and write a really shitty review, and they're going to crush your soul because it's like telling calling your baby ugly, right? So it happens. But so it's ebb and flow. That's kind of how I do it. I don't like salmon either. For you, what is the most challenging thing to cook, if anything? That's a good question. I'll have to think about that. But really, I mean, again, not to beat a dead horse. Um, but my whole F-step methodology, right? The flavor technique or flavor sauce technique, execution, preparation is kind of like the Rosetta Stone of cooking, right? You can take any cuisine, any dish, any food, and shoot it through the F-step lens and break it down to those individual components and understand it relatively quickly. Because my belief is cooking is all just flavor, structure, and technique. Now, there's levels of refinement to that, to where so if you specialize in Szechuan cuisine and you've been cooking it for the last 20 years, right? It's going to take me a long time to catch up to where you're at. However, I could get a pretty good Szechuan cuisine working recipe with my own sort of twist and flair on it going within a day just by understanding the flavor structure and techniques used in Szechuan cuisine. So, with that said, honestly, I mean, it sounds kind of like a silly answer, but the absolute hardest thing for me to cook is your grandma's whatever, your grandma's spaghetti, your grandma's meatloaf, your grandma's, you know, um, Szechuan chicken, whatever, whatever it is. Okay. Um, because there's that X factor. It was grandma's, and we hit on this all the time, so I'm not gonna rehash it. But that's also too when people come in and they say, hey, we're gonna have a Indian style wedding at your place, and my mom used to make a dish like this. Can you make that? Yeah, I can make something that gets pretty close. I could make something that has the proper flavors. Can see that this recipe was a stew that used a tough cut of meat. So I definitely understand how to stew, and I definitely understand how to make tough cuts of meat tender by using the stewing process and the marination process. And I can paint these flavor structures over the top that your grandmother used. But can I replicate that recipe? No, not even close. Right. So that's the hardest thing to cook. Everything outside of that is just understanding flavor structure and technique and how those break down. Okay. Elliot says you can find consommé in most Asian grocery stores, which is true. When I started getting into ramen a few years ago, it was like a decade ago. Really, time flies. Consommé was you couldn't find it, and I settled on my own sort of consommé powder that I created using some secret ingredients, which we may or may not get into at a future date. I still haven't decided if I want to create a ramen noodle empire, and if I ever decide not to, then I'll give you all the secrets to my ramen dough. There isn't a better cooking podcast. I agree. I mean, given I'm biased, but thank you for the nice stuff that you're saying. So if you don't like something like, say, salmon, how do you know if your dish you are making in a restaurant is any good? Because I know what it's supposed to taste like, right? So let's pretend for a second that you. So another thing I don't like is I don't like swordfish. Okay, because if I want a steak, I'll eat a steak. Swordfish is just way too dense. It's just I just don't like it, right? Also, my dad loved to cook swordfish, and he would like bake it in milk. It's bizarre. I've never seen anyone else do that. He would bake it in milk for like an hour and a half. Maybe I'm probably exaggerating at this point, but it just wasn't ever good. Um, but is salmon supposed to be dry? No. Is it supposed to have? Is it supposed to be overly fishy? No. Is it supposed to lack flavor? No. So I create really good salmon dishes because I still understand conceptually what salmon's supposed to taste like. It's not like salmon tastes different to me than it does to everybody else. I just don't prefer that flavor, right? But salmon tastes like salmon to me, just like it tastes like salmon to everybody else. Some people like that flavor, just other people don't. So I taste salmon, I say, okay, well, it tastes like this. But any sort of cut of meat or anything in general, right? It shouldn't be burnt. It shouldn't be dry. It shouldn't be chewy, right? So you just kind of eliminate those things by by applying proper technique, and you're going to be good to go. I kind of want to see Chef Jacob on Chop, see how the S-step concept stands up to all those weird baskets. First of all, um, cold heat, I would slay Chop, right? Second of all, I would never do it because look, while we're being honest, it's First of all, it's hard for me sometimes to not drop F-bombs. I know it offends some people, and I'm sorry. I just and you've noticed I've tried to be good about it. Um, but sometimes it's just the F word is just such a thick, round, juicy word, and it's a great adjective, especially if you come from, you know, kitchens in general. But I mean, people who I don't know, I just feel like a big part of my vocabulary misses when I can't say the F word. So I'm good. So earmuffs, okay? I'm going to drop it right now. Uh, Chopped, cutthroat kitchen, kitchen competitions in general are fucking beneath me. Okay, and before you think I'm getting all arrogant on you, they're beneath most cooks and most chefs. They're a good way to get your brand out there if you want to cook on TV and whatever. If you're looking for your break, they're a great way to get your brand out there. Now, there's people who enjoy doing cooking competitions. And if you're into that sort of thing, then by all means go and do them. And if you hit on it, it could be you get a good pop in your popularity, but it doesn't last that long. I've always been sensitive to the fact that as a chef, people will treat you like your best friend. And they, hey, I'm friends with the chef down at this restaurant, yada, yada, yada. He's a good buddy of mine. We're going to come in. We're going to have a great meal. He's going to take really good care of us. Um, but at the end of the day, you're just the help, right? At the end of the day, you're just the help. And that really always fucking pissed me off. Okay. Because I'm so much more than that. And you as a professional cook are so much more than that. And the reason why my food tastes good is because my approach to cooking food is so much more than just being the help. And yeah, I might be being oversensitive about it. But there's this thing where you're a chef, you're in hospitality, you're a server, dance monkey dance, right? Go fucking dance for me, do a jig. Okay, it's offensive. And I can't tell you how many times people come to me and say, "Hey, chef, we're doing, you got a big name. We're doing this big, cooking competition at a local, yada yada yada, and we want you to come. We want you to compete." So this fucking food journalist over here who couldn't cook himself out of a wet paper bag, and his three best friends, right, that all have food blogs that all fucking suck, can sit there and judge your food that you rushed to cook in a fucking hour with some bullshit ingredient basket. Yeah, no thanks, count me out. Okay? You don't have the palate or the knowledge or the understanding to judge what I do every single day. And it's not there to benefit me. It's there to benefit you. It's there to benefit whatever you're promoting, right? So you want me to show up and cook? We're going to do it under my terms, and you're going to fucking pay me to do it. So that's my feeling on that. So I have no desire to go on Cutthroat Kitchen or go on any number of cooking competitions and dance around for a $10,000 check, right? Just not my bag. Not my bag. But here's the thing: if you do and you study F step, um, you never know until you try. Might have a little fun. No one would judge you on Cutthroat. No, I wouldn't have fun. I don't. I don't know. I don't. It does not appeal to me whatsoever. Um, you could say, hey, chef, why don't you go bang your head up against this wall for a little bit and see how you like it. I mean, I might like it. Can't say I've ever done it, right? Actually, but I have done cooking competitions, and I hate them. Universally, I hate them. But here's the thing: Chef Sean, my right hand guy at the restaurant, he loves doing cooking competitions, which is great. So I send him to do all the cooking competitions, and he really enjoys doing them. It's his thing, right? It's not my thing. So just like if you like pork reductions, more power to you. If you like doing cooking competitions, more power to you. If you think you'll ever catch me on a episode of Chopped or Cutthroat Kitchen, um, you're crazy. It's never going to happen. But chef, there is a classy UK show. I think Michelin chefs on one against each other. Very slow, chilled, hours to cook, very upmarket. Can't recall the name. Yeah, but you're missing the problem. They're still judged by fucking food journalists, which I despise. and it's all very unpopular to say that, right? Because you kind of need food journalists to be on your side if you want to make it as a chef, but not really. That's the grift. Food journalists in general are awful people. They're parasites on our industry, right? And they come in pretending like you're like they're friends when really they're just milking you for content because they're not good enough fucking writers to produce their own content, right? So they come to you and say, "Chef, can I write a piece on you? And can I get a recipe from you?" And yada yada yada. Oh no, that recipe is too complex. We got to make it. And if you can, Monkey, while you're dancing for me, I'd like you to put a seasonal Valentine's Day twist on it because it's gonna fit my Valentine's Day article that's coming out in 2 weeks. But I need it to you by this Friday, and it's gonna be really great exposure for you. Yeah, no thanks. No thanks. Agreed, but these we judge by fellow chefs. I'm trying to think of the name. So why don't I get to judge? Why do I have to dance around like a monkey, right? Why don't I get to be the expert judge? Why aren't you asking me, somebody who has spent 20 years cooking professionally, who wrote the F step fucking curriculum, which is the Rosetta Stone to all cooking, and if you doubt me, just go and read it, right? Why don't I get to judge? Why do I have to dance like the monkey? That's why I see it. Oh, the comments are coming in too fast. They're just kind of scrolling away. Do you plan post-pandemic on doing more boot camps? It was an outstanding experience the first time. I'd love to do it again, reinforce all that I learned. I don't know. The boot camps were really hard to do. They were, God, they're a lot of work. I love doing them, but I don't know. I don't know. I'm so busy on a professional level, and I really like doing the content. If I ever do a boot camp again, quite frankly, it would probably be a one-off, so I could update the material, maybe do like a boot camp version 2.0, and I would do it once, and I'd have live students there just so I could, because I enjoy teaching in a live environment and playing off of live students. At one point, I thought that I wanted to open up like my own sort of cooking school where I would hold boot camps like every other week and stuff like that, but it's not what I want. It's a lot of work, but I love working in professional kitchens and building professional culinary teams, but I also love teaching other people how to cook. As I've gotten more successful at working in other kitchens and building professional teams, I have less and less time to teach people how to cook. And the professional cooking part of what I do as it scales up tends to be, it makes me a lot more money than I would teaching. But there might be a version 2.0. You should do your own competition on your YouTube channel where you host and judge. But yeah, but then I'm just asking other chefs to be my monkeys and to dance around, which I would then just be the asshole that I hate. Okay. Well, now that I've pissed off all food journalists in existence, I think I've done enough damage for one day. I appreciate everyone hanging in there with me with the live stream. Um, did I? Oh no. Okay. So just so you know, I do have a YouTube channel that is live. It's separate. I call it Stella Culinary Live, but it's still really small, so I can't actually have like a quick link to it. So what that means is sign up for my email list. I'll put a link in the show notes. But YouTube is a really good place to replay these things. So oddly enough, right, I started doing these live video podcasts just to interact with people. And people tend to like watching my facial expressions while I freak out about food journalists and things of that nature. So if you like to stream the videos live, you could do so on my YouTube channel. Just search for Stella Culinary Live. And this is separate from the Jacob Burton YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Jacob Burton. And that's where I have like all my actual cooking videos, where I have like 100 and some odd subscribers, or 100 some thousand subscribers. But I have another YouTube channel that's much smaller called Stella Culinary Live, which these live podcasts will be posted to. And based on some of the issues that we were having today with the Facebook stream, we might shift our stream over there completely. So we'll see. someone straight out of culinary school applies for a job to work in your kitchen, do they have a chance of getting hired? Yeah. But I also hire people that haven't gone to culinary school. Because here's the thing: most professional cooks suck. They're really not that good. Our culinary culture, especially in the United States, is really, really weak. And so I end up training people anyways. So I have a whole training process. But also too, I never hire from outside without I don't hire from outside for less than entry level or for more than entry level positions. So I make my sous chefs, I make my chef de cuisines, I make my junior sous, right? They all come from within the system because it doesn't matter what your degree is and what restaurants you worked in before. Chances are there's going to be a little bit of a tough uh, learning curve, and it's all mental mindset. Either you got what it takes or you don't. So yeah, I hire people from culinary school, but also too, I tell people, I mean, you're going to learn more working for me than culinary school. So save the 60 grand, come work for me. I'll actually pay you to learn. Ba, 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 ba. Any chance on annotating the video so you can quickly scroll through the topic? No, not a chance in the world. Only because it takes way too much time. Sorry. I know that'd be super helpful. Like then I'd have to go back through. I have to take notes. I have to type the whole thing up. Right. The whole thing about these live podcasts is just boom, boom, boom. You know, get them out quick. I have I have a weakness for getting bogged down in details. You know, I'm a detail oriented person, so I actually have to force myself to not get too bogged down. If I spent time annotating the videos and writing in text and all that sort of stuff, it would just take forever. Eventually, maybe if this thing grows to where I can afford to hire a producer, and I know people, they've sent me emails that, oh, I'll produce for free. I'm not looking for people to help me produce the show for free because if you start touching my products, I'm going to boss you around. And I'm not going to ask anyone to take me bossing them around for free. You might think it sounds like a good idea, but trust me, it's not. So if I ever get to a point where I can actually, you know, justify paying a producer, you know, we may do that. Or people who watch the live stream, if they want to just annotate the video and drop it in the comments, they can do that as well. Please, more boot camps. Also, don't forget us from all around the world, outside U.S. and in Europe. Please consider online course on basic Zoom, for example, practical online. I'm not really sure what that means. Sandia, please consider online course on basic Zoom, for example, so maybe like a cooking course, like on the hotline. I do actually locked up in my head. I have a whole course that I want to do for professionals in the kitchen. That kind of all the way from like dishwasher and kind of works your way up to an executive chef, teaches you about food costing and everything that you would need to go from a dishwasher to an executive chef. Problem is it would take a lot of time, um, and I don't know how many takers I would have on that course. But it's something that I feel like I need to do eventually. All right. Well, I know I've said goodbye like 3 times now, but I think this is goodbye for sure. I'm sure you know, we've done enough damage for the day. We're creeping up on 2 hours. I know I'm gonna have a lot of people probably angry with me, but that's okay. That's okay. Not you guys. You guys tune in for the honesty. So that's it. Fun podcast. Off to a bit of a rocky start, if I were to say so myself, right? If I was being completely honest. But you know, it's the reality of the situation. So hope everyone has a fantastic weekend. Goes out and cooks something delicious, and I will see you all next week. We will be streaming live every Friday morning from here on out, come hell or high water. Unless I get sick, but I'd never get sick. I've been in the industry for 20 years. I have never called off sick, not a single time. So I will be here next Friday morning and every Friday after that, unless maybe I take a vacation one of these days. So that's it. Have a great weekend. Cook something delicious, and I will see you all next week.